Hey guys, tonight we're about to venture into one of history's most captivating tales. Picture yourself on the edge of a vast desert, the scorching sun setting over golden dunes, and in the distance, you see it, a caravan, stretching as far as the eye can see, 1,000 camels trudging through the sand. Each one loaded with gold. You probably won't survive this journey if you don't know how to handle heat, dust, and a whole lot of wealth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious about where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It was the year 1324, and a man who would become the richest human in history was embarking on a pilgrimage. His name? Mansa Musa, the king of the Mali Empire. But this wasn't just any ordinary pilgrimage to Mecca. It was a journey that would echo through the centuries. Imagine taking a road trip with not just a few bags of gold, but so much that your caravan stretched across the horizon. This was no ordinary king, and his wealth was anything but ordinary. Mansa Musa wasn't just a ruler, he was a phenomenon. His riches were practically mythical, a combination of gold, salt, and the kind of trade power that few empires could dream of. His realm, Mali, was one of the wealthiest and most influential places on earth at the time. And as Musa prepared to set out for his Hajj, he wasn't thinking small. No, Mansa Musa wanted to show the world just how much power he held, not just over Mali, but over the world's economic stage. In fact, the size of his wealth was so staggering that it made a lot of people question the very nature of wealth itself. How could one man possibly own so much? Historians still argue about the numbers, but one thing is for sure, Mansa Musa's wealth had never been seen before. Some say he brought over 100 camels, each carrying as much as 300 pounds of gold. But it wasn't just about the gold, his presence was a spectacle. The journey wasn't just a personal spiritual quest, it was an opportunity to flex. And flex he did. You could say this was the first gold flex of the modern era, centuries before Instagram influencers even knew how to take the perfect selfie in front of a limbo. But while today's influencers show off fancy cars and watches, Mansa Musa had something far more precious in his possession: gold. But it wasn't just about showing off. Musa knew exactly what he was doing. He was making sure the world knew his empire was the top dog, the one everyone should envy. By the time he reached Cairo, the sheer magnitude of his wealth had the city buzzing. Coins were pouring out of his caravan, and merchants were scrambling to get a piece of his action. It wasn't just a religious pilgrimage. It was a declaration to the world: Mali was here to stay, and if you weren't paying attention, well, you'd better start. As Mansa Musa's caravan made its way through the scorching sands of the Sahara, the scope of his empire stretched far beyond the horizon. Mali, the land he ruled, wasn't just large, it was vast, rich, and pulsing with power. At its peak, the empire covered nearly 1.3 million square kilometers, roughly the size of modern-day France and Spain combined. Picture that, a kingdom so large it practically swallowed the land around it. And at the helm of it all was Mansa Musa, a man whose very name seemed to vibrate with the weight of wealth and influence. But how did Mansa Musa end up in charge of such a sprawling empire? The story of Mali's rise is as captivating as the man himself. By the time Musa came into power, his empire had already been a major player in West Africa for centuries. The Mali Empire emerged from the remnants of the Ghana Empire, a powerful kingdom that dominated trade routes across the region. But when the Ghana Empire crumbled, Mali seized the opportunity, taking control of the gold mines and salt trade routes that had once sustained its predecessor. As you probably guessed, gold was the lifeblood of the empire. This wasn't just a commodity, it was the currency of power, and Mali had it in abundance. Mansa Musa inherited his throne under unusual circumstances. He wasn't initially in line for the throne, he was actually a deputy to his cousin, the reigning king. But after the king's sudden death, Musa stepped in as the logical successor. What followed was an era of remarkable expansion, both in terms of territory and wealth. His empire controlled crucial trade routes that connected sub-Saharan Africa with the Mediterranean world. This meant that the Mali Empire was at the crossroads of some of the most important commercial networks in the world, with gold, salt, ivory, and other goods flowing through its markets like rivers of wealth. Historians still debate whether Musa's wealth was as incomprehensible as it is often depicted. Some scholars argue that the numbers tossed around in historical accounts, like those staggering reports of Musa handing out so much gold in Cairo that he caused inflation, might be exaggerated. After all, when you have someone this wealthy, it's easy for stories to slip into the realm of myth. But even if the exact figures are a little inflated, one thing is clear: Mansa Musa's empire was unbelievably rich. By the time of his Hajj, Mali was already a regional superpower. The empire's wealth was so immense that it extended beyond the material. Musa was known as a patron of the arts, and his reign saw a flourishing of culture and intellectual activity. Scholars from across the Muslim world were drawn to Mali, particularly to its legendary city of Timbuktu, which became a hub for learning, science, and religion. Musa's Mali was not just a land of gold, it was a land of ideas, innovation, and cultural exchange. It was a golden age for the empire, one that would leave a legacy that stretched far beyond Musa's lifetime. What makes Musa's reign even more fascinating is that, despite all this wealth and power, he still had a reputation for extreme politeness and humility. Imagine a man so rich that his wealth could flood entire economies, yet he walked with the grace of someone who knew the value of respect. His Hajj wasn't just a display of wealth, it was a demonstration of his piety and devotion to Islam. But don't mistake that humility for weakness. It was a strategic choice, one that ensured his power and prestige would endure long after his reign. Now you might be wondering, just how did Mansa Musa become so wealthy? Was it all about gold mines, or was there something more to it? Well, the short answer is yes, gold was at the center of everything. But Mansa Musa's wealth wasn't just about striking it lucky in a gold rush. It was about strategy, control, and tapping into the heart of West Africa's economic lifeblood. Mali was rich because it sat right in the middle of two critical trade networks: the Trans-Saharan trade routes, which connected sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa and beyond, and the Niger River, which ran right through the heart of the empire, offering natural trade routes for goods. The Mali Empire controlled these vital crossroads, and at the center of it all was gold, an astonishingly abundant resource. In fact, Mali's gold mines accounted for a large percentage of the world's supply at the time, and they were a cornerstone of the empire's economic structure. Mali wasn't just a gold mine, it was the gold mine. Historians still argue over the exact amount of gold Musa possessed. Some estimates claim that Mansa Musa had control over 50% of the known world's gold reserves. While that might sound like the stuff of legend, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. Mali's gold mines were immense, and Musa's empire had direct access to them. This was no minor fortune. This was an empire built on one of the world's most coveted resources. Gold, of course, wasn't the only commodity Mali controlled. Salt, another highly prized commodity in the medieval world, flowed through Mali in vast quantities, and the empire's salt mines were just as important as its gold mines. It's strange to think about it now, but in the time of Mansa Musa, salt was just as valuable, if not more so, than gold. Salt was a vital part of daily life, used for preservation, cooking, and trade, and Mali was one of the world's largest producers. But Musa didn't just sit back and watch his wealth accumulate. He was a king with a purpose. His control over gold and salt meant that Mali could not only thrive, but it could expand its influence across Africa and into Europe and the Middle East. When you control something everyone needs, you become indispensable. But Musa didn't just hoard his gold. He used it, generously, wisely, and to gain even more power. His riches didn't just buy him influence. They bought him respect, and that respect helped him to forge critical alliances. One of the most remarkable aspects of Musa's reign was his ability to weave diplomacy into his strategy. Mansa Musa wasn't just a conqueror. He was a king who understood that wealth is not only a tool for power but also a tool for peace. He forged alliances with neighboring kingdoms, sending ambassadors to faraway places like Egypt, North Africa, and even the Middle East. It wasn't just about gold, it was about presenting Mali as the center of culture, trade, and intellectual exchange. And yet, despite his immense wealth and power, Musa's generosity was also one of his defining traits. Historians love to tell the tale of how, during his Hajj, Musa distributed so much gold in Cairo that he caused an inflation crisis. Some say he gave away so much gold that the value of the precious metal plummeted. Whether the tale is entirely true or just an exaggeration, it captures something essential about Musa. His wealth was never about hoarding. It was about making a statement, a very polite, very grand statement about just how far his influence stretched. Historians still debate the extent of the inflation caused by Musa's gold giveaway in Cairo. Was it really as extreme as they say? Some argue that the inflation crisis was more of a myth, a convenient story spun by those who witnessed the scene and wanted to underline just how excessive Musa was. But one thing is certain, Musa's wealth was so vast and his generosity so grand that it left an indelible mark on every place he visited. In Cairo, it wasn't just the markets that were affected, it was the entire economic system. Prices skyrocketed, merchants had to adapt, and the very fabric of the city's economy was altered. This wasn't the only way Musa flexed his wealth. When he arrived in Mecca, he didn't just stay in a humble tent like many of the other pilgrims. No, he set up a royal camp, with lavish tents, gold decorations, and a lavish display of luxury that stunned the locals. It wasn't about the pilgrimage for Mansa Musa. It was about showing the world the might of his empire and the generosity of his spirit. It's no wonder his name became synonymous with wealth and power. Now, picture this. You're walking through Cairo in 1324, and the air is thick with excitement and a touch of confusion. The sounds of the marketplace are deafening, with merchants shouting their wares and the scent of spices hanging heavy in the humid air. Then, suddenly, the ground beneath your feet trembles. You look up to see a procession unlike anything you've ever seen, a caravan of camels, hundreds strong, each carrying gold, silk, and people, trailing behind one of the wealthiest men in history, Mansa Musa. You probably don't even know where to start. You've never seen so much wealth concentrated in one place. The sight of it is almost overwhelming. Mansa Musa's Hajj to Mecca was, without a doubt, a pilgrimage that stunned the world. The journey wasn't just about religious devotion. It was a carefully calculated demonstration of wealth, power, and influence. Imagine a king with so much gold that he could afford to distribute it without a second thought. Imagine walking into a city and knowing that you could change its entire economy by simply showing up. That's exactly what happened when Musa and his entourage reached Cairo. His gold, sometimes referred to as the Golden Flood, was so abundant that it was said he caused a temporary collapse of the local economy. Gold's value plummeted, and for years after, merchants in Cairo still felt the effects of Musa's generosity. Historians still debate the scale of the economic repercussions. Some claim that Musa's gold giveaway was so extreme that it disrupted trade and caused hyperinflation. Others argue that while Musa's generosity did have a lasting impact, the inflation wasn't quite as catastrophic as legend suggests. Regardless, one thing is clear: Musa's presence in Cairo was a spectacle, and the ripple effects of his wealth spread far beyond just the markets. He didn't just give gold away, he showcased it. By the time Musa's caravan left Cairo, he had already left a mark on the city and its economy that would last for decades. But the gold wasn't just for the markets, it was for the people, too. Musa's actions throughout his journey demonstrated a deep commitment to his faith, but they also served as a strategic move to further cement his influence over the region. He wasn't just an ordinary king who was happy to rule from his throne in Mali. He was a leader who sought to expand his reach, his power, and his name. And what better way to do that than by making a grand entrance on the world stage? Mansa Musa's Hajj wasn't only about wealth, it was about making sure his empire was recognized as a powerful, influential force. His generous acts didn't stop in Cairo. He continued giving gold away in Mecca, Medina, and across the Islamic world. By the time he returned to Mali, He had made countless connections, strengthening the ties between Mali and the broader Islamic world. His journey wasn't simply a pilgrimage, it was an ambitious move that placed Mali firmly on the map as a significant player in both the economic and cultural spheres. But there's more to the story than just gold. Along the way, Mansa Musa didn't just spread his wealth, he also spread knowledge, culture, and ideas. The people who traveled with him, scholars, architects, artists, and traders, helped spread Mali's influence across the Islamic world. While some historians focus on the physical wealth of the empire, others argue that the cultural wealth that Musa took with him was just as important, if not more so. Through his travels, he introduced Mali to new ideas, new technologies, and a broader intellectual tradition. It's easy to think of Mansa Musa's wealth as the sole driver of his influence, but his Hajj reveals something more profound. It was the combination of wealth and intellect that allowed him to build a lasting legacy. By the time Musa returned to Mali, he had not only made his empire richer but also more intellectually connected to the broader Muslim world. The exchanges of ideas and the wealth of cultural knowledge he brought back would go on to influence Mali for generations to come. Historians still debate whether Musa's true goal was spiritual or political. Did he make the Hajj out of genuine religious devotion, or was it a calculated political move? The answer isn't clear. What is clear, however, is that Mansa Musa's Hajj had far-reaching consequences that extended far beyond religion. It was an act that shaped the future of Mali, the Islamic world, and the course of history itself. Mansa Musa's generosity during his Hajj wasn't just about dropping gold in markets and making the city of Cairo tremble under the weight of his wealth. It had a far-reaching economic impact that spread like ripples across the Mediterranean world, touching everything from trade routes to currency values. The scale of Musa's gold giveaway and the extravagant displays of wealth he exhibited caused quite a stir, and the effects weren't immediately felt in just the cities he visited. They reverberated across economies for years to come. As Musa's caravan moved across Egypt, traders and merchants alike were left in awe, not just by the spectacle of such a large and opulent procession, but by the consequences of having such an enormous amount of gold introduced into the markets. Cairo, a major hub for trade, found itself under the pressure of a sudden influx of currency. The sheer volume of gold Musa distributed during his stay was enough to cause inflation, something that historians still debate to this day. Some claim that Musa's actions led to a dramatic spike in inflation, causing gold's value to plummet temporarily. Others suggest that while the impact was significant, the legend of gold flooding the economy might have been slightly exaggerated. Nevertheless, the story stuck, and it served as a testament to just how deep Mansa Musa's wealth ran. Gold wasn't the only commodity that Mali's empire controlled, though. Salt, another precious resource, was just as valuable in Musa's world. Salt wasn't just for seasoning food back then, it was crucial for preserving food, which was vital in the hot and arid conditions of the Sahel. In fact, salt was so valuable that it was traded ounce for ounce with gold in some regions. Mali controlled salt mines as well as gold mines, and it was this combination of resources that gave the empire its truly commanding wealth. So when you think about Mansa Musa's fortune, remember that his empire didn't just sit on a gold mine, it sat at the intersection of gold, salt, and the most critical trade routes in the medieval world. But while Mansa Musa's Hajj and wealth made waves across the world's markets, there was another side to his story that wasn't as focused on the glittering gold or the economic disruption he caused. Mansa Musa, the ruler of the Mali Empire, was a man of intellect, ambition, and cultural prowess. While his gold flex was undoubtedly a statement, his true genius lay in how he parlayed that wealth into the cultural, intellectual, and political capital that would ensure the empire's success for generations. His wealth was a tool, just like salt and gold, and he wielded it with extraordinary finesse. During his reign, Mansa Musa didn't just build palaces or fund lavish public works. He became a patron of the arts, architecture, and education. The most famous example of this is Timbuktu, the jewel of Mali, which would go on to become one of the world's most revered centers of learning. Musa didn't just keep his empire's wealth to himself, he shared it with scholars, artists, and architects, building institutions that became known across the Muslim world. Timbuktu housed one of the most impressive libraries of the time, and it attracted scholars from far and wide. As much as his gold was his legacy, Mansa Musa's investment in intellectual capital was a masterstroke that left a lasting mark on the world's cultural and scientific development. Historians still debate the true extent of Timbuktu's importance in the grander scheme of the medieval world, especially given the more fragmented nature of Africa's historical records. Was it really the shining beacon of learning and culture that it's often portrayed as? Some argue that its role in the world of science, literature, and religion might have been exaggerated by later generations, eager to romanticize the past. But what isn't up for debate is that Mansa Musa's support of Timbuktu, and of education as a whole, cemented his place in history not just as a king of gold, but as a king of culture and intellectual exchange. It wasn't just about gold. It was about what he could do with that gold. Musa understood the importance of education, culture, and intellectual capital, and he used his wealth to foster an environment where those things could flourish. Scholars came to Timbuktu not just for its riches, but for its knowledge. And in doing so, Mansa Musa ensured that Mali's influence wasn't just seen in the weight of its gold but in the weight of its intellect. The libraries he funded housed texts that would influence Islamic scholarship for centuries, and they provided a foundation for the intellectual currents of the time. In that sense, Mansa Musa wasn't just shaping the material world, he was shaping the very world of thought and understanding. So while Musa's gold may have made him a legend in the eyes of those who marveled at his wealth, it was his deeper investments, the ones in culture and knowledge, that gave his empire a lasting legacy. As much as we remember the Golden Flood, we must also remember the golden age of learning that Mansa Musa nurtured with that same gold. As Mansa Musa continued his journey across the vast desert, distributing gold like it was confetti at a royal celebration, the impact of his pilgrimage was felt not just in the economy, but across cultural and intellectual landscapes as well. His generosity had already reverberated through the streets of Cairo and beyond, but Musa's ambitions stretched far beyond mere wealth display. His role in the cultural renaissance of Mali is often overshadowed by his legendary gold flecks, but make no mistake, it was his commitment to learning, education, and intellectual exchange that truly shaped the long-term legacy of his empire. By the time he returned to Mali after his journey, Musa's reputation wasn't just built on his extreme wealth. It was now also rooted in his dedication to making Mali a center of learning. One of the most significant contributions Musa made to Mali and the wider world was the creation of Timbuktu as a beacon of knowledge and culture. While many associate the city with gold and riches, it was the intellectual capital that Musa built that would leave an indelible mark on history. Historians still argue whether Mansa Musa truly intended for Timbuktu to become the intellectual center that it did, or whether it was more of a happy accident. Some claim that it was Musa's visionary leadership and desire for cultural influence that led him to establish schools, libraries, and institutions dedicated to learning. Others suggest that it was more a matter of circumstance, that the wealth of the empire attracted scholars and intellectuals, who turned Timbuktu into a hub of thought and discourse. Regardless of the reasons, the outcome was undeniable. Under Musa's reign, Mali became an intellectual and cultural powerhouse. Musa's commitment to education didn't just extend to Mali's elite, it also reached beyond the borders of his empire. Scholars from all over the Muslim world made pilgrimages to Mali, hoping to learn from the great libraries and institutions Musa had funded. These scholars weren't just interested in religious texts, they came for science, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The libraries of Timbuktu became a repository of knowledge that was shared with the wider world, and Musa's role in this cultural exchange made him a key figure in the intellectual networks of the medieval period. While the golden riches of Mali's wealth certainly played a role in Musa's ability to create this intellectual hub, it was his understanding of the value of education that allowed the empire to thrive beyond material wealth. He didn't simply use his gold to expand his own power or to pay for lavish palaces and feasts. Instead, he directed significant portions of his wealth into funding education and supporting intellectual pursuits. It wasn't just about flaunting his riches, it was about creating a legacy that would last long after his death. Historians are still debating the full extent of the intellectual exchange that took place in Timbuktu during Mansa Musa's reign. Some believe that the city was the most advanced center of learning in Africa during the medieval period, while others argue that it was one of many similar intellectual hubs throughout the region. What is indisputable, however, is the significance of the libraries, universities, and scholars that thrived under Musa's patronage. He may have been a king of gold, but he was also a king of wisdom, and his reign would shape the intellectual landscape of Africa for centuries to come. In addition to the intellectual boom, Musa's support of the arts also had a lasting impact on Mali's culture. Under his reign, Mali became a cultural hub, attracting artists, architects, and musicians who helped create a vibrant artistic scene. Some of the most stunning architectural achievements of the era, including the construction of the Jingareba Mosque in Timbuktu, were funded by Musa himself. The mosque, a grand structure made of mud and brick, is considered one of the finest examples of Sudano-Sahelian architecture and a testament to the wealth and cultural sophistication of the Mali Empire. It wasn't just a place of worship, it was a symbol of Mali's prominence on the world stage. Musa's investment in the arts and intellectual pursuits wasn't just about accumulating prestige or furthering his own agenda. It was about building a legacy that would outlast his lifetime. His understanding of the power of culture, learning, and intellectual exchange set him apart from many other rulers of his time. While other kings might have focused on amassing wealth for wealth's sake, Musa understood that true power came from creating a society that valued knowledge and culture as much as gold. Historians still argue whether Mansa Musa's reign truly marked the peak of Mali's power or if it was the beginning of a slow decline. Some believe that his focus on culture and education was a sign of his deep commitment to Mali's future, while others claim that it might have been a distraction from the military and economic challenges the empire would soon face. Regardless of where you stand on that debate, one thing is clear: Mansa Musa's reign was a golden age for Mali, and it laid the foundation for a cultural and intellectual legacy that would reverberate through the centuries. As Mansa Musa's reign continued to unfold, the effects of his generosity and intellectual patronage began to resonate not just within the borders of Mali, but across the Islamic world and beyond. However, despite his extraordinary wealth and cultural contributions, there are elements of his legacy that remain shrouded in mystery and debate. How much of his wealth was real, and how much was amplified over time? Historians still argue whether Musa's empire was truly as rich and powerful as later accounts suggest, or whether the story has been embellished over the centuries to make him a larger-than-life figure. Many modern historians grapple with the portrayal of Mansa Musa as an endlessly wealthy monarch. While it's clear that he had vast resources, his empire controlled significant gold and salt mines, and his trade routes were the arteries of the medieval economy. The precise scale of his wealth remains unclear. Some argue that the tales of his gold are exaggerated, crafted by chroniclers eager to highlight the incredible riches of one of the most famous African rulers. These scholars suggest that the narrative of his wealth is more folklore than fact, a construction of myth rather than reality. After all, how could anyone possibly possess such wealth without its effects being felt more acutely across the medieval world? Other scholars, however, take a more literal approach, suggesting that while the accounts may be somewhat exaggerated, there is no denying that Mansa Musa's wealth was incomprehensible by the standards of his time. His Hajj to Mecca, his lavish spending, and the extravagant displays of gold certainly paint a picture of a man whose wealth was unparalleled. Some even suggest that Musa's riches, while extraordinary, were only possible because of the sheer control he had over the vast gold deposits in his empire. This control, they argue, gave him the ability to wield his wealth in ways no other ruler could, either through grand gestures of generosity or through the cultivation of alliances that solidified Mali's position in the world. Historians also remain divided over the question of whether Mansa Musa's wealth was sustainable in the long term. Could an empire built on the back of one of the world's largest gold reserves remain prosperous indefinitely? Was it a blessing or a curse to have such vast resources concentrated in one place? These questions bring us back to the heart of the debate. Mansa Musa's wealth wasn't just a product of gold, It was a product of his ability to manage that wealth in ways that benefited his empire both in the short and long term. But was this management truly effective in securing the empire's future? Some historians point to the eventual decline of Mali after Musa's reign, which they argue could be linked to the very wealth that Musa had so carefully curated. Without a doubt, the Mali Empire's riches created incredible opportunities for Musa's reign, but could it have laid the groundwork for the eventual instability that followed? The evidence for this is sparse, but it's something scholars continue to debate. While Mali thrived under Musa's leadership, the empire would face increasing challenges after his death, including political fragmentation, internal strife, and outside invasions. Whether Musa's wealth was a stabilizing force or a potential catalyst for decline remains a topic of intense scholarly discussion. One area where there's little dispute, however, is the fact that Mansa Musa's legacy extended far beyond Mali's borders. His reign marked a cultural renaissance that spanned not just West Africa but the entire Islamic world. Through his patronage of the arts and learning, Musa helped ensure that Mali would be remembered as a beacon of knowledge for centuries to come. His sponsorship of scholars, architects, and artists gave rise to an intellectual movement that would shape the future of Africa and the broader Islamic world. Despite the debates over his wealth and political legacy, one thing remains certain: Mansa Musa's reign represents a high point in the history of African empires. His story has been immortalized in both legend and fact, and whether his wealth was as boundless as the myths suggest, or more modest in reality, it's undeniable that his empire had an undeniable influence on the world. From gold to intellectual pursuits, Mansa Musa's reign changed the course of history in ways that continue to echo through the centuries. Historians still argue over whether the Mali Empire could have maintained its golden age after Musa's death, but what is beyond debate is the sheer scale of the empire's achievements during his reign. The kingdom flourished under Musa's leadership, and the impact of his wealth, combined with his cultural vision, continues to shape the story of the region to this day. Was his fortune the key to Mali's greatness? Or was it the combination of his economic strategy and intellectual investments that truly set his empire apart? While we may never know the full truth, Mansa Musa's place in history remains assured. His wealth, his diplomacy, and his contributions to culture and knowledge have cemented him as a figure worthy of both awe and study. While Mansa Musa's extraordinary wealth and cultural contributions are often the focus of his legacy, there's another side to the story that deserves attention: his diplomacy. A ruler of vast riches and power, Mansa Musa knew that wealth alone couldn't guarantee the long-term stability of his empire. If anything, it could make him a target. So, he adopted a strategy that blended the soft power of diplomacy with the hard power of military force, ensuring that Mali maintained its influence long after his hajj to Mecca. Musa's diplomatic genius wasn't just about keeping his allies close. It was about making sure that the world saw Mali as a key player in global affairs. He understood that the wealth of Mali, while impressive, could only take him so far. To truly secure his place in the broader geopolitical landscape, Musa had to forge alliances and relationships that would strengthen his position. And that's exactly what he did. One of the most famous diplomatic maneuvers Mansa Musa made was during his pilgrimage to Mecca. His journey wasn't just about religion or wealth, it was about positioning Mali as a powerful and influential player in the Muslim world. By the time he reached Cairo, his caravan was already a spectacle, and his reputation preceded him. But Musa didn't stop there. He used his time in Cairo to establish ties with key figures in the Islamic world, cementing relationships that would benefit Mali for years to come. These connections were critical, as they allowed him to expand Mali's influence beyond the borders of Africa and into the Middle East and beyond. Historians still argue whether Musa's pilgrimage was purely a religious journey or whether it was a carefully orchestrated diplomatic move. Many believe it was a bit of both. While Musa was undoubtedly devout, his actions suggest that he understood the power of spectacle. His wealth wasn't just for show, it was a means to an end. By impressing the rulers and scholars he encountered along the way, he was able to forge alliances that would help elevate Mali's status on the world stage. And it wasn't just with the Muslim world that Musa forged relationships. His diplomatic efforts also extended to neighboring kingdoms and distant lands. He knew that to maintain Mali's influence, he needed to ensure that the surrounding regions recognized his power. Musa's diplomacy wasn't just about making friends. It was about ensuring that Mali had a network of allies who would support the empire's interests. And this network of alliances helped to ensure Mali's prosperity for many years. While Mansa Musa was a master of diplomacy, he didn't shy away from using military force when necessary. Mali's wealth, and its control over key trade routes, made it a prime target for raiders and rival kingdoms. But Musa's military prowess helped protect his empire from these threats, and he was known to deploy his forces when the need arose. His military successes, combined with his diplomatic acumen, ensured that Mali remained a powerful force in West Africa during his reign. Historians still debate whether Mansa Musa's diplomatic approach was entirely successful in the long run. Some argue that his alliances were crucial to the empire's stability, while others suggest that they may have been short-lived. The reality is that, while Musa's reign marked the peak of Mali's power, the empire would eventually face significant challenges after his death. In the centuries that followed, Mali's influence waned, and the empire eventually fragmented. But during his lifetime, Mansa Musa's diplomacy ensured that Mali remained at the forefront of West African politics. Despite the eventual decline of the Mali Empire, Mansa Musa's diplomatic legacy is undeniable. He understood that wealth alone wouldn't guarantee his empire's future. It was his ability to form alliances and navigate the complexities of international relations that ensured Mali's place in the world for as long as it did. His reign was a testament to the power of diplomacy, and it serves as a reminder that the most successful rulers aren't just those with the most wealth, but those who know how to use their resources to build lasting relationships and influence the course of history. In the grand scheme of Mansa Musa's legacy, it's easy to focus on the gold, the libraries, and the cultural renaissance. But his diplomatic genius is equally important. Without his strategic alliances, his ability to navigate the political landscape, and his careful management of Mali's relationships, his wealth and cultural achievements might have been fleeting. Instead, Musa's legacy endures, not just because of his gold, but because of his ability to position Mali as a force to be reckoned with on the world stage. Mansa Musa's reign may have reached its zenith during his lifetime, but as we've seen, even the wealthiest and most powerful empires face inevitable challenges. For all of his diplomatic brilliance, his grand vision of Mali as a thriving superpower eventually began to unravel after his death. The reasons for this decline are varied and complex, but many historians point to a combination of factors, including internal political struggles, military overextension, and the loss of the centralized leadership that had made Musa's empire so strong. One of the biggest challenges to the long-term stability of Mali came from within. After Mansa Musa's death in 1337, there was no clear succession plan. While Musa had appointed his son, Magan, to succeed him, the empire quickly fell into internal power struggles. Successors lacked the political and diplomatic skill of their father, and soon rival factions began to form. As a result, the central authority that had been the backbone of the empire began to erode. Without the unifying force of a strong leader like Musa, Mali began to fragment, and the cohesion that had been built through years of diplomacy and military power began to disintegrate. But it wasn't just internal politics that contributed to the decline of the Mali Empire. The empire's vast size, coupled with its reliance on trade routes that stretched from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean, made it difficult to maintain. Over time, these trade routes became more vulnerable to attack from external forces. While Mansa Musa had been able to defend his empire against external threats through a combination of military force and diplomacy, his successors were not as successful. By the 15th century, the Mali Empire had lost control over many of its key trade routes, and this loss of economic power severely weakened the empire's ability to maintain its dominance. Mali's military decline also played a key role in its eventual downfall. Under Mansa Musa, the empire had a formidable military that kept invaders at bay and helped to consolidate power across the region. However, after his death, the military's strength began to fade. This made Mali vulnerable to external threats, especially from the Songhai Empire, which was rising to prominence in the region. By the late 1400s, the Songhai Empire had begun to challenge Mali's control over West Africa, and in 1591, the Songhai Empire defeated the Mali forces in the Battle of Tondabai, further signaling the decline of Mali's dominance. Another factor that contributed to Mali's decline was the changing nature of the global economy. While gold and salt had been the driving forces behind Mali's wealth, the European age of exploration in the late 15th and early 16th centuries began to shift trade routes away from Africa. European exploration led to the establishment of new trade routes that bypassed Africa, severely impacting Mali's ability to maintain its economic power. The opening of sea routes to the Americas and Asia began to reshape the global economy, and the trans-Saharan trade routes that had once been vital to Mali's wealth and power began to fade in importance. Despite these challenges, Mali's decline did not erase the legacy of Mansa Musa. The empire may have lost its grip on power, but its influence continued to echo through West Africa and beyond. The cultural and intellectual achievements of Mali, especially in Timbuktu, remained influential for centuries after Mansa Musa's death. Even as the empire fragmented, the libraries, mosques, and schools built during his reign continued to inspire scholars and leaders in the region. The influence of Mansa Musa's patronage of education and the arts would continue to be felt long after the fall of the empire. Mali's decline also paved the way for other empires to rise. The Songhai Empire, which eventually became the largest and most powerful in West Africa, was directly influenced by the legacy of Mansa Musa and the Mali Empire. The wealth and cultural achievements of Mali provided the foundation for Songhai's rise, and many of the same trade routes and intellectual networks that had been established under Musa's rule continued to play a critical role in the region's development. Historians still argue about the precise reasons for Mali's decline. Was it the loss of leadership after Mansa Musa's death? The inability to adapt to changing economic circumstances? The military defeats? Or was it simply the inevitable fate of every empire, no matter how rich or powerful? The debate continues, and likely will for centuries to come. But what's certain is that Mansa Musa's reign marked the height of the Mali Empire, and his contributions to culture, learning, and global trade ensured that the empire would leave a lasting imprint on history. In the end, the story of Mali's decline is as much about the fragility of empires as it is about the enduring power of legacies. Mansa Musa's wealth and influence may have been fleeting, but his cultural and intellectual contributions continue to inspire awe today. His empire may have crumbled, but his name will forever be associated with one of the greatest periods of wealth, power, and cultural flourishing in African history. As Mali's political influence waned after Mansa Musa's death, one could easily assume that his legacy would be reduced to mere myth. But if there's one thing about Mansa Musa, it's that his name resonates far beyond the confines of historical textbooks. From the very first mention of his name, we're not just talking about a ruler of gold, but a symbol of West Africa's profound role in world history. And while the Mali Empire itself might have been on the decline, the echoes of Mansa Musa's influence could still be felt in the cultural and intellectual spheres of the region, and even across the globe. When we think about Mansa Musa today, most people think of him as the richest person who ever lived. That gold-filled caravan, his lavish spending, the stories of Cairo's inflation, they're the stuff of legend. But historians have worked hard to piece together a fuller picture of the man behind the myth. And in doing so, they've uncovered a ruler who wasn't just preoccupied with accumulating wealth, but who deeply understood the cultural power that wealth could wield. Mansa Musa's legacy didn't just lie in the piles of gold he left behind but in how he used his power to elevate his people and culture. Timbuktu, for instance, which has become synonymous with ancient knowledge and learning, owes much of its prestige to Mansa Musa. Under his reign, the city flourished as a center of Islamic scholarship, art, and science. Schools, libraries, and mosques sprang up, drawing scholars from all corners of the Muslim world. It wasn't just a gold rush of wealth that made Timbuktu famous. It was a gold rush of knowledge. Thanks to Mansa Musa's vision and patronage, it became one of the most important intellectual hubs of its time. Historians still argue about the precise role of Timbuktu in the broader context of Islamic intellectual history. Some scholars argue that the city's intellectual status has been exaggerated by later generations eager to build a legacy around Musa's empire. While it may not have rivaled cities like Baghdad or Cairo in terms of sheer volume of scholarly output, it was nonetheless a key player in the transmission of knowledge, particularly in West Africa. And it was Mansa Musa who set the stage for that. But the fascinating thing about Mansa Musa's legacy is that it isn't confined to dusty old history books. His name still stirs the imagination today. His pilgrimage to Mecca remains one of the most widely discussed journeys in the history of Islam, not just because of the spectacle of his wealth, but because of the political and cultural connections he forged. These diplomatic moves helped Mali become part of a broader Muslim network, one that would have lasting effects on the cultural exchange between West Africa and the Islamic world. Musa's Hajj was not just an isolated event, it was a reflection of the globalizing forces of the 14th century, a time when trade, knowledge, and culture flowed across borders in unprecedented ways. Mansa Musa's influence extended well beyond the medieval period. As West Africa's great empires, Mali, Songhai, and others, continued to rise and fall, his model of leadership and diplomacy provided a template for rulers long after his death. His ability to balance wealth with intellectual and diplomatic power was a key part of the legacy he left behind. And though Mali eventually fell to internal strife and external invaders, it didn't take long for the world to remember Musa's contributions. In modern times, Mansa Musa's legacy has taken on new life. His story has become a symbol not just of wealth, but of African greatness, of the idea that Africa once had empires that were rich in both culture and power, long before colonialism rewrote much of the continent's history. Musa's rise to prominence is a reminder that Africa's past is full of powerful empires and extraordinary figures, even if their legacies have often been overlooked or diminished in historical narratives. And Mansa Musa's wealth? Well, it remains an enduring fascination. The number-crunching attempts to quantify his gold and his treasures continue to capture the imagination. Just how much was he worth in today's money? Some scholars argue that Mansa Musa's net worth would be somewhere in the ballpark of $400 billion, far surpassing the wealth of today's wealthiest individuals like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. It's almost comical to think that one person could ever possess such vast riches, yet the legend of Mansa Musa makes it seem almost plausible. Even in the age of billionaires, his name still carries the weight of something even more massive, the weight of a legacy that shaped both the past and the present. Historians continue to debate whether Mansa Musa was truly the wealthiest person who ever lived, but one thing is certain: his influence was greater than gold. His reign marked a high point in West African history, and his vision for Mali helped elevate the empire to unparalleled cultural, intellectual, and economic heights. His contributions to education, culture, and diplomacy ensured that Mali would remain one of the greatest empires in African history, even as it slowly faded from the political stage. Mansa Musa's story is one of splendor, power, and complexity. It's a story that mixes fact with legend and legacy with myth. But through it all, one thing stands clear: he wasn't just the richest man in history. He was a visionary, a patron of the arts and sciences, and a ruler who understood that wealth isn't just measured by gold, it's measured by the impact you leave on the world. And Musa's impact is still being felt today. Now that we've covered the monumental wealth, diplomacy, and cultural contributions of Mansa Musa, we can begin to look at the long-lasting consequences of his empire's decline. While the Mali Empire might have fragmented after his death, the legacy of Mansa Musa did not fade away quietly into the annals of history. Rather, it became part of a broader narrative about the role of African civilizations in global history, one that's only now beginning to receive the recognition it deserves. Musa's empire may have fallen into decline, but the ripple effects of his reign spread far beyond his lifetime, influencing the cultures and politics of the region for centuries to come. One of the most significant impacts of Musa's rule was the establishment of a narrative of African greatness. When European explorers and traders arrived on the shores of Africa, they were stunned by the riches and sophistication of the African kingdoms they encountered. The wealth and cultural wealth of Mali, particularly the city of Timbuktu, would leave a lasting impression on those early European travelers. However, while the story of Mansa Musa's wealth and empire may have become a fascinating point of intrigue in European circles, the true depth of his empire's influence went largely unnoticed by many in the Western world until much later. The legacy of Mali and Mansa Musa was buried beneath layers of colonial history, which sought to diminish the significance of African civilizations in favor of European narratives of dominance. But in recent decades, historians, scholars, and even the people of West Africa have begun to reclaim the legacy of Mansa Musa and his empire. Their work is helping to shed light on an important chapter of history that has often been overlooked. In many ways, Mansa Musa's legacy has been resurrected in the modern era, thanks to the work of historians, cultural leaders, and even popular media. From books to documentaries to films, his story has resurfaced as a symbol of African greatness, an essential counterpoint to centuries of misrepresentation and marginalization. And in this context, Mansa Musa is more than just a symbol of wealth. He represents the enduring power of African empires and the vital contributions of Africa to the global cultural and economic tapestry. Mansa Musa's empire may have fallen, but his cultural vision, which combined intellect, art, and wealth, laid the groundwork for the continued intellectual growth in West Africa. This is evident in the resilience of the region's historical legacy, particularly in places like Timbuktu, where scholarship and learning continued for centuries even as political structures shifted. The libraries and universities that Mansa Musa funded have influenced generations of scholars and intellectuals, providing a foundation for the exchange of knowledge across Africa and the Islamic world. Historians continue to debate the precise nature of Mansa Musa's impact, but one thing remains indisputable: his reign reshaped the cultural and intellectual landscape of the medieval world. His patronage of learning helped bridge gaps between Africa and the Middle East, and his wealth, when used for cultural and diplomatic purposes, provided the Mali Empire with lasting influence far beyond its geographic borders. Even as the empire crumbled and the political landscape of West Africa shifted, the intellectual legacy of Mansa Musa and his empire persisted. The libraries of Timbuktu continued to attract scholars, and the ideals he championed, the integration of wealth and intellectual growth, remained a beacon of inspiration. Mansa Musa's role as a leader who understood the importance of both material and intellectual wealth continues to resonate in the modern world. His story reminds us that wealth isn't just about the accumulation of gold, it's about how that wealth is used to uplift others, to invest in education, and to build a lasting legacy that transcends time and place. Today, Mali may no longer be the economic powerhouse it once was, but the cultural and intellectual foundations laid by Mansa Musa's patronage remain as vital and relevant as ever. Historians still grapple with the complexities of Mansa Musa's empire and its eventual decline, but one thing is certain: his legacy is far from forgotten. The great wealth of the Mali Empire may have faded, but the lasting impact of Mansa Musa's vision, diplomacy, and cultural investments continues to shape the narrative of African history. His story is one of ambition, humility, and vision, a ruler who understood that the true measure of wealth lies not in the treasures one accumulates, but in the legacies one leaves behind. And so, as we reflect on the life and legacy of Mansa Musa, we're reminded of the richness of African history and the vital role that figures like him played in shaping the world. While Mali's political power eventually faded, the cultural and intellectual flourishing that Mansa Musa championed continues to inspire and inform scholars, leaders, and thinkers today. His empire may have been vast, but it was his vision, his generosity, and his commitment to cultural and intellectual development that truly set him apart. In the centuries following Mansa Musa's reign, the Empire of Mali, while no longer as dominant, still played a significant role in shaping the cultural, political, and intellectual landscape of West Africa. The kingdom, now fragmented and weakened by internal strife, lost much of its former glory. Yet, in many ways, the seeds that Musa had planted during his reign continued to bear fruit long after his death. His era may have come to an end, but his legacy endured, influencing generations of leaders and scholars across the African continent. One of the key reasons why Mansa Musa's legacy has remained so influential is the cultural foundation he built during his reign. By investing in education and intellectual development, he ensured that Mali was not only a political and economic force but also a center of learning and cultural exchange. Even though Mali eventually lost its political power, the idea of a flourishing intellectual and cultural environment lived on. Timbuktu, the jewel of Musa's empire, continued to attract scholars, artists, and scientists, and its reputation as a great center of learning remained intact. However, as the centuries passed, the political decline of Mali left room for new powers to emerge in West Africa. The Songhai Empire, one of the most formidable empires in African history, rose to prominence in the 15th century and eventually absorbed much of the territory that was once part of Mali. The Songhai Empire adopted many of the practices and traditions that had been developed under Musa's reign, including the patronage of education and the promotion of intellectual and cultural exchanges. In fact, the Songhai Empire's rise can be seen as a continuation of the intellectual and cultural legacy established by Mansa Musa, even if the political structures had changed. The cultural impact of Mansa Musa's reign also left a mark on other parts of Africa and the wider Islamic world. His patronage of architecture, literature, and science helped to foster a deep connection between Africa and the Islamic world. By encouraging the development of Islamic scholarship and fostering relationships with key Islamic scholars and intellectuals, Musa positioned Mali as a key player in the broader network of Muslim civilization. As the centuries passed, this connection between Mali and the Islamic world continued to shape the region's intellectual output, from the rise of other empires to the development of trade networks and cultural exchanges. Even today, the influence of Mansa Musa's empire is evident in the intellectual and cultural life of West Africa. The legacy of Timbuktu as a center of learning has endured, despite the political turmoil that followed the empire's decline. Timbuktu remains a symbol of the richness of Africa's intellectual and cultural heritage, and its libraries continue to inspire scholars and researchers around the world. In many ways, Mansa Musa's commitment to education, art, and architecture laid the groundwork for the development of modern scholarship in Africa. Historians still debate the exact reasons for Mali's fall after Mansa Musa's reign. Was it the loss of strong leadership? Was it the empire's overextension? Or was it simply the changing political and economic circumstances that led to the empire's fragmentation? These questions remain open, but what's clear is that the foundations laid by Musa, in terms of wealth, diplomacy, culture, and intellectual exchange, provided a powerful model for future African rulers and scholars to follow. In the modern era, Mansa Musa's legacy is experiencing a resurgence. In the 21st century, as Africa reclaims its history and narrative, Mansa Musa stands as a towering figure who exemplified the wealth and cultural power of African empires. His reign reminds us that Africa has always been a continent of great civilizations, with deep intellectual traditions that have been overlooked or forgotten in global histories. Mansa Musa's story is a reminder that African greatness is not a myth. It is a reality that was once at the heart of global history. Today, the story of Mansa Musa serves as a point of pride for many people of African descent. His accomplishments are celebrated not just as a historical curiosity but as part of a larger movement to reclaim African history and identity. His wealth, while astonishing, is only part of the story. His true contribution lies in how he used that wealth to elevate his people and culture, creating a legacy that has endured across centuries. The legacy of Mansa Musa is not one of gold alone, but of knowledge, culture, and vision, a legacy that continues to shape the world today. It's difficult to look at the modern world and not see the echoes of Mansa Musa's influence. His reign was a turning point in African history, one that helped shape the course of civilizations both within Africa and beyond. The legacy of his wealth, diplomacy, cultural patronage, and intellectual investment continues to serve as a beacon for African leaders, scholars, and thinkers, reminding them of the incredible potential that lies within the continent. And as more people around the world learn about Mansa Musa and his empire, his legacy will only continue to grow, serving as a reminder of the greatness that once existed and the greatness that still lies ahead. Mansa Musa's legacy, though monumental, has often been obscured by the passage of time, overshadowed by the colonial narratives that reshaped much of African history. But as more scholars and historians continue to dive into the archives, there's been a shift in the way we view the past, particularly the African empires that thrived long before colonialism. Mansa Musa, as both a symbol of wealth and wisdom, has slowly emerged from the shadows, inspiring a new generation to take pride in the intellectual and cultural achievements of African civilizations. As we've already seen, the wealth of Mansa Musa was staggering. His empire was built on the back of abundant natural resources, gold, salt, and strategic trade routes. But wealth in the medieval world wasn't just about how much gold you could hoard. It was about how you used that gold to influence others, build networks, and create a lasting legacy. Mansa Musa was keenly aware of the power of wealth, but he understood that its true value lay in what it could do for the greater good. Unlike many rulers of his time, whose wealth often fueled military conquests or lavish lifestyles, Musa saw his fortune as a means to create a lasting cultural and intellectual legacy. Timbuktu, which had been a thriving cultural hub during his reign, continued to thrive long after his death, albeit with diminishing political influence. The city became synonymous with the great libraries and universities that Musa had funded, attracting scholars from all over the Muslim world. These intellectual exchanges not only expanded the knowledge of those who came to study but also allowed for the preservation of African heritage and Islamic scholarship. This tradition of learning carried on through the centuries, and even when the political stability of Mali began to crumble, the intellectual foundations remained firmly rooted. But while Timbuktu is often considered the crowning achievement of Mansa Musa's cultural investment, his broader contributions to the spread of Islamic learning across Africa were equally important. He didn't just create a center of learning in Mali, he actively promoted Islamic scholarship across the Sahel and into North Africa. His alliances with powerful Muslim rulers and intellectuals helped to solidify Mali's position within the larger Islamic world. Through these diplomatic channels, Mansa Musa facilitated cultural exchanges that enriched both Mali and the broader Muslim civilization. Historians often debate whether Mansa Musa's reign marked the peak of Mali's power or whether it was simply the beginning of the empire's inevitable decline. Some argue that the sheer scale of his wealth and the subsequent splendor of his reign set an unsustainable standard for his successors. Others point out that the political structure he created was too fragile, dependent on a single, strong ruler. Without Mansa Musa at the helm, the unity of the empire faltered, leaving it vulnerable to internal divisions and external threats. Regardless of how one views the reasons for the eventual decline of Mali, there is no denying the immense legacy left by Mansa Musa. His reign was a golden age for Mali, a period when art, culture, and learning flourished, and his wealth and diplomatic strategy solidified Mali's place in the history of the Islamic world. His contributions to education, architecture, and the intellectual life of West Africa are still felt today. The libraries of Timbuktu, though damaged by time and conflict, remain symbols of the empire's commitment to knowledge and learning. Historians also debate the true scale of Mansa Musa's wealth. Was he truly the wealthiest man who ever lived, as some modern estimates suggest? Or were the accounts of his wealth inflated over time? The lack of concrete records from the era makes it difficult to say for certain, but the fact that his name continues to be associated with unimaginable wealth speaks volumes about the magnitude of his influence. The stories of his gold and his lavish displays of generosity may have been embellished, but they point to a ruler who understood the power of wealth to shape the world around him. Today, Mansa Musa's legacy has been embraced not just by historians but by the people of Mali and the wider African diaspora. His story has become a symbol of African greatness, a reminder that Africa's past is rich with cultural, intellectual, and economic achievements that have long been overshadowed by colonial narratives. His reign serves as a model of leadership, cultural investment, and diplomatic acumen, and his wealth is not seen simply as an accumulation of gold but as a tool used to elevate his people and his culture. In a world where Africa's history is often reduced to colonialism and exploitation, the story of Mansa Musa offers a powerful counter-narrative, a reminder that African empires were once among the most powerful, influential, and culturally advanced on the planet. The renaissance of interest in Mansa Musa's life and legacy marks an important step in reclaiming Africa's place in world history. As we reflect on the life of Mansa Musa, we can't help but marvel at the complexities of his reign, his genius as a diplomat, his visionary investments in culture and education, and his unparalleled wealth. And as his story continues to inspire, we are reminded that history isn't just about the past. It's about how the past shapes the present and the future. Mansa Musa may have lived in the 14th century, but his influence is still very much alive today, both in the academic world and in the hearts of people who are reclaiming the richness of Africa's past. As we draw closer to the end of our journey through the life and legacy of Mansa Musa, it's important to reflect on what we can learn from his rule. Mansa Musa's empire may have eventually fragmented and declined, but the principles that guided his reign, vision, cultural investment, diplomacy, and humility, still offer lessons that resonate in our modern world. Even in the face of extraordinary wealth and power, Musa's legacy was shaped by his capacity to think beyond personal gain and towards the collective good of his empire. One of the greatest lessons from Mansa Musa's reign is the importance of long-term vision in leadership. Musa wasn't a ruler focused on immediate gratification. He understood that true greatness comes from building something that lasts. His investments in education, architecture, and cultural exchange were not short-term goals. They were visionary efforts designed to ensure that Mali would remain a powerful and influential empire for generations. Today, this focus on long-term goals remains as important as ever. Whether in politics, business, or social leadership, the ability to look beyond immediate rewards and think about the lasting impact of your actions is what ultimately separates great leaders from fleeting figures. Mansa Musa also understood the power of education. In a world where intellectual capital often competes with material wealth, Musa invested his riches not only in gold but in the future of his people. By funding the libraries, schools, and universities of Timbuktu, he ensured that Mali would become a hub for learning and scholarship. His reign marked a period of intellectual flourishing, one that would shape the course of West African history. In today's globalized world, education remains a key to success, both on an individual level and for entire nations. Musa's recognition of the importance of intellectual growth, as well as his dedication to making knowledge accessible, offers a timeless reminder of the power of education to transform societies. Then, there's Mansa Musa's diplomacy. His strategic alliances with other kingdoms, empires, and Islamic rulers were a key factor in maintaining Mali's power and influence. He didn't just use his wealth for conquest, he used it to build relationships and create a network of allies. This type of diplomacy, focused on mutual benefit and respect, is as relevant today as it was in the 14th century. In today's world, where international relationships can make or break a nation's standing, Mansa Musa's approach to diplomacy offers valuable insight. It reminds us that true power doesn't come from domination but from collaboration and respect. Building bridges instead of walls is a lesson that transcends time and continues to be crucial in international relations. Musa's humility, despite his immense wealth, was another trait that set him apart. Even with all the riches in the world, he didn't let his wealth define him. His commitment to modesty and his genuine concern for the well-being of his people reflected his true character. He wasn't just a king who hoarded gold, he was a ruler who shared it, not to show off, but to improve the lives of others. This humility, combined with his power, made him a ruler respected both by his own people and by foreign leaders. In our own time, we can often be overwhelmed by the temptation to flaunt success. Mansa Musa's example teaches us that true greatness is not measured by what we accumulate but by how we use our position to uplift others. Mansa Musa also left behind a legacy of resilience. Even though his empire eventually declined after his death, the cultural and intellectual foundations he built during his reign have endured. Timbuktu, for example, remains a symbol of Mali's intellectual legacy, and many of the manuscripts he helped preserve still survive today, offering a window into the past. The fact that his reign continues to inspire so many people today is a testament to the lasting impact of his decisions. In a world that can seem unstable and unpredictable, Mansa Musa's legacy serves as a reminder that what we build today can outlast us, continuing to inspire and shape future generations. Despite the challenges faced by Mali after his reign, Mansa Musa's memory remains a shining example of what a ruler can achieve when they combine wealth with wisdom, diplomacy with culture, and power with humility. His story is a reminder that, even in the face of inevitable decline, a ruler's legacy can continue to shape the world long after they're gone. It's not just about the gold they accumulated but about the ideas they nurtured, the alliances they formed, and the future they built for their people. In closing, Mansa Musa's life was one of monumental wealth, but even more importantly, it was one of monumental impact. He used his resources not just to amass power, but to change the course of history. His reign may have been brief in comparison to the centuries that followed, but his influence is undeniable. Mansa Musa didn't just build an empire. He built a legacy that would echo through the corridors of time, reminding us that true wealth is not found in gold alone but in the lasting impact we have on the world. As we reach the final chapter of Mansa Musa's extraordinary journey, it's clear that his story, while marked by his immense wealth, is also defined by the lasting influence he left on both Africa and the broader world. His reign, though marked by the splendor of gold, was ultimately about far more than just riches. It was about shaping the future, laying the groundwork for intellectual, cultural, and diplomatic achievements that would endure well beyond his time. In the years following Mansa Musa's death, the Mali Empire fell into decline. As we've discussed, internal strife, political fragmentation, and the growing external pressures of rival kingdoms like the Songhai Empire led to the disintegration of the once mighty Mali. But Mansa Musa's cultural and intellectual investments were not so easily undone. Timbuktu, the city he helped transform into a hub of learning and culture, continued to stand as a beacon of intellectual achievement long after the political power of Mali faded. The libraries he funded, the scholars he attracted, and the tradition of knowledge he established would go on to influence generations of thinkers, poets, scientists, and leaders. Historians continue to argue whether Mansa Musa's wealth was truly as astronomical as the legends suggest. But one thing is clear: the impact of his reign went far beyond gold. It's easy to be captivated by the tales of his generosity, his gold-filled caravans, and his awe-inspiring pilgrimage to Mecca. Yet the true legacy of Mansa Musa lies not in the spectacle of wealth but in the foundation of learning, culture, and diplomacy that he built. His understanding that power is not just measured by material wealth but by intellectual and cultural influence sets him apart from many other rulers of his time. In today's world, as we increasingly look to our past to inform our present and future, Mansa Musa's legacy offers a powerful lesson. His reign reminds us that wealth, when used wisely, can be a force for good, not only for the accumulation of power but for the enrichment of people's lives through education, culture, and collaboration. His willingness to use his extraordinary resources to promote learning, to strengthen his empire diplomatically, and to build enduring institutions shows us the value of long-term thinking and the importance of sharing resources for the collective good. Reflecting on his legacy, it's easy to see how Mansa Musa's contributions have shaped not only the history of West Africa but the entire world. His support of scholarship in Timbuktu, the creation of lasting alliances with powerful Islamic leaders, and his promotion of trade and cultural exchange laid the groundwork for the globalized world we live in today. His understanding of the power of knowledge, as well as his commitment to sharing that knowledge, continues to resonate in a world that is increasingly interconnected and interdependent. As we close this journey through Mansa Musa's life, we're left with a few key reflections. His reign was not just about material wealth, it was about the richness of culture, the expansion of knowledge, and the building of lasting relationships. His story is not only a tale of riches and extravagance but a reminder that true wealth is measured by the positive impact we have on the world. In Mansa Musa's case, his wealth was used to enrich not just his empire but the broader world, leaving behind a legacy that transcends gold and continues to inspire people across the globe. Mansa Musa's empire may have eventually crumbled, but his influence has never truly disappeared. Today, as we remember the story of the richest man in history, we also honor the enduring power of his vision, A vision that saw wealth not as an end in itself but as a means to foster intellectual, cultural, and diplomatic connections that would outlast his reign. Now, as we close our exploration of Mansa Musa's legacy, let us take a moment to reflect on what we've learned from his story. His life teaches us the value of investing in education, the importance of diplomacy, and the power of wealth when used for the greater good. Mansa Musa's story is one of ambition, humility, and vision, and it serves as a reminder that even in the face of incredible wealth and power, the true measure of a leader is the lasting impact they have on the world. So, with that, we come to the end of our journey. Mansa Musa, the King of Gold, may have walked the earth more than 700 years ago, but his story still resonates today. His empire may have faltered, but his legacy remains an enduring symbol of the greatness that Africa has always known, and will continue to know for generations to come.